Well, good morning. Hello, wherever you are. Um, I'm in the central time zone, so it's still good morning for me. But I just want to thank Frank for being here and being our first pro Q&A for the Science Alliance. And I'm excited about this. I'm excited about this effort. I'm excited about the things that we can do and hopefully move the conversation forward on health and wellness, all things health and wellness in the fire service. But as our inaugural Science Alliance Pro Q&A, I am so excited to have Frank Leto be running this because I think, and to be our current pro, because of the people that I think have an impact and experience in the fire service and knowledge and really can provide tools and resources and ideas. I think Frank is at the top of my list, and he absolutely hates when I say that. So I like to brag on him, and you see him shaking his head. And I like to brag on him all I can because he has experience. Has been at FDNY for, you retired after
After
25 years?
38 years.
38 years. So I was totally selling you short there. But was deputy director of the counseling center, the counseling services unit there, but also has responded to pretty much every disaster that the fire service has had to deal with nationally, and sometimes even internationally. So just a fountain of knowledge and wisdom. And then John Kane is with us, just retired out of Syracuse Fire Department, and is a fellow for the Science Alliance through the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation. So we have him on loan to build this kind of stuff up. And then I'm Sara Jahnke, and I direct the Center for Fire Rescue and EMS Health Research, and Brittany is the deputy director there. And we're just excited. So basically the way this is going to work this month and moving forward is we're going to try out all of our ideas for about 6 months at a time, see what people like, what they don't. So feel free to give us feedback. But this is really just a conversation, and people can put in the chat if they have questions, or they can feel free to pop on and ask questions, and we'll just sit around and chat and brainstorm this stuff. John, did you want to? Typically, we kind of threw John into the deep end with this. We're like, okay, you can come in and see this, and here's the link. But so I told him that I would jump on and kick off the first one. But John, do you have anything you want to say?
No, I think this is actually a great topic to open with. Um, for reasons that are still kind of a mystery, I think a lot of the fire service doesn't really embrace mental health as a major issue, even though it clearly is. And Frank, I think you actually came up to Syracuse uh, 5 or 6 years ago, and you did our peer support training.
I did, yeah. I
That
did it
model.
with Drew Kane, who now has my position, and Scott Robinson, who we were just breaking in, who's now behavioral health coordinator at the IFF in Washington. So we had a pretty good group up there. And my recollection is that the crew in Syracuse was a really good group, but they were undergoing some changes in the department, and there was not a lot of support at that time. I hope things have changed in Syracuse.
So the short answer is yes, they did. The outgoing fire chief at the time had, for whatever reason, railed against the peer support model. And then as he was basically being ousted and a new person was taking over, he actually was in the class, but he hadn't been promoted to chief yet, is when we finally got people to agree to do this training. We had 20 something people in the class initially. I think we were the first one of the first upstate New York fire departments to take on the peer support model. Since then, I think Binghamton has sent a few people through it, as well as Albany. Um, I retired just a couple months ago in April, but we were still kind of struggling with identity in terms of, are we doing critical incident, the ICISF model, which involve a lot of diffusing and debriefings? Are we going to get more towards peer support, which is a little more informal, a little more, I think, comfortable for a lot of people? The people who are exposed to the peer support always seem to have very good interactions because it was less structured. And I think what I was finding anyway, like with debriefings and diffusings and stuff, people were turned off by like the very formal structure, sitting around in a circle and forcing everybody to talk about what is upsetting them or what they didn't like. A lot of people would simply just clam up and stop communicating. Whereas I think peer support offers, you're getting a glimpse into the person to see how they're doing. And you can kind of start to see which road they're headed down. And it's generally done, as you know, in private. So I think there's a lot of success that's going to be had with it. But Syracuse was still kind of struggling to shed the formal ICISS stuff. And it just, we're creatures of habit in the fire service. So, I mean, people do
Yeah,
20
and
plus.
I think that's okay. Peer support is what we do naturally. We've been doing it for 200 years in the fire service. We're just kind of formalizing it a little bit. Everybody has their own personality, their own adaptability to it. So and CISM, we owe a lot to CISM. They kind of gave us the introduction to behavioral health in the fire service, Jeff Mitchell and company. So I do tip my hat to Mitchell and Everly for introducing that in the 80s. But we've most departments have moved on. The ones that haven't, we can use peer support and CISM together. After the Boston Marathon bombing, Boston at the time had a strong CISM team. We came up there from New York and other places and worked very, very closely with them. So we really kind of blended the models together. So it shouldn't be a fight anymore. If a department has a CISM team, that's okay. Let's kind of blend it with peer support.
No, I agree. I think they can complement each other. And Syracuse was offering. We were basically the sole provider of any type of peer support or CISM for a big chunk of Central New York. So we actually traveled a couple times to outside departments. And when we traveled, we would generally utilize something that aligned probably more closely with CISM, whereas the internal stuff was starting to take on more of the peer support, I guess, type of flavor. So
yeah, John, I don't remember who the gentleman was. It was from Syracuse, but when you first started going out, getting a call from him, and just kind of picking our brains in New York, about the approach, and so I had a couple of conversations, but I do not recall who that was when you had those responses.
yeah, I'm not sure who would have actually been in charge of the team at the time. I'm trying to recall, but
Yeah, I don't think it's important, but it bodes to show that you guys were the first ones up in New York doing that kind of work.
Yeah, and one thing we had discussed before I left, and I don't think that they've necessarily implemented it yet, but I think it's important to develop contacts kind of up and down the thruway and other career departments that are similar in size, so that if you do, or when you do, God forbid, have a line of duty death, you can rely on outside agencies that you already kind of have
Sure.
a relationship with. Familiar faces are nice during a time of hardships.
Yeah.
So
One of the best programs for many years now is a very small department. Our friend John Oates was the chief there. He's retired from the chief of East Hartford, Connecticut.
Yep.
But they're a 110 person department, 105 person department, and they have a tremendous program. Connected to the union, connected to the administration. And they use local hospitals and local resources, so you don't have to have you don't have to be Chicago and New York or a major department to have a really comprehensive program. And it may be even easier in some of a small. I mean, I don't know, not easy is the wrong word, but less complicated in a smaller department. So I always get you're from New York or you're from Houston, that's easy there. Well, not necessarily. It's not an excuse if you have a department of 50 or 25 not to have a program. It's you need less resources in those departments.
I agree. I see a question from Anya. which is a very good one. How have you gotten buy-in from the line so people are more willing to try new and different resources, or have you gotten pushback from adding new resources? I can tell you from my experience in Syracuse, firemen hate two things, right? The way things are and change. So no matter what you roll out, there's always going to be somebody there's going to be naysayers. There's going to be people that think it's ridiculous or it's BS. Um, Buy-in happens very slowly. It's a cultural kind of change. And a lot of times it will come from people who have had direct exposure to the program, who had a good experience, and will start to informally tell people over beers or whatever, like, hey, the peer support thing actually works. It helped me. It's very, very slow. And to think that you're going to make a change overnight and get the department to suddenly love it and think it's fantastic is completely unrealistic. It's just a matter of time. One, I think, very important component for us was making sure that that every demographic is well represented, right? Because people, generally speaking, I found, like to talk to people that are similar to them. So people will not talk to a higher rank about something they're struggling with. So you won't have a firefighter reach out to a deputy chief and say, "Hey, I'm really upset about this call I had." Conversely, you won't have a deputy chief reach down to a lieutenant or captain. It's important to have every race represented in your team, every gender. Females are generally going to be more comfortable talking to females, is what we found, especially if it's something very personal in nature. So that helped us, I think, bridge some of the gaps, just making sure that your department is well represented in the team. And it also goes as far as like time on the job. A new guy may not be comfortable talking to a 25-year veteran and vice versa. So that helps a little bit, but in reality, buy-in comes with time and experience.
Yeah, I can't agree with you more,
Yeah.
John. I think that was a really good answer to that question. And I think it goes against our nature sometimes because, we respond to a call and in 15 minutes, we kind of wrap it up. So we like things to get done yesterday, and we like immediate gratification. And this is a process. It's a process individually. It's a process as a group. It's a process with the union. It's a process with the administration. So it's patience is a virtue here. And I've seen it in my career in my department in New York, and in departments all over the country. I mean, there's a huge shift here that's going on. I think I think people are becoming aware of the impact of behavioral health issues on their careers, on their health, on their departments, more than ever. I used to believe, like most firefighters, that the cancer risk and the cardiac risk and other illnesses that we're prone to were just because of our exposure. And I think a lot of it is our exposure, but a lot of it is our behavioral health. There's clear data saying that people with behavioral health issues have higher cancer rates and behavior and cardiac issues and other illnesses. The other thing that I think is going to be the next frontier here is sleep, and the impact that sleep and shift workers, particularly firefighters and police officers, EMTs. There's not a lot of data on how we can sleep and how we can get good REM sleep and all the healthy sleep that others have. So behavioral health. I think you can't avoid it at this point. I think if you're a chief of a department and you're going for an interview or going for an interview as a chief, and you're not talking about health and the behavioral health and the wellness of the firefighters and the EMTs that you're going to supervise, you shouldn't be getting that job. That conversation 10 years ago wasn't happening in those interviews. So I think it's a shift. I think you still have to be patient in your department.
Awesome. Thank you.
I think, Frank, the issue of sleep is a huge one, and I don't know what the answer is there. You know, with obviously there has to be fire protection 24/7, and more than three-quarters of fire departments in the U.S., career fire departments, are on some type of 24 schedule, 24 on, 24 off, and so forth, and Kelly days and what have you. So providing around the clock fire protection, you know, with the same people doesn't lend itself to healthy sleep patterns, both, you know, on the job, especially if you're in a busy company, you're not going to get a lot of sleep during your 24-hour shift, and then adjusting back down to a normal sleep schedule on your days off, only to start the cycle again roughly 5 days later. I don't know what the answer is there, you know, and clearly we're 54%, I think, of all line of duty deaths are still cardiac related in nature as a primary cause. So I think there is a huge mental health component in there. And also, you know, we're still, I think, missing the boat on healthy eating and exercise. Every one of us has probably been to a fire station where we can point to 2 or 3 of our coworkers who are way overweight, you know, and a lot of the firehouse meals aren't healthy. And mental health on top of that, you know, the stress and everything else that comes with the job, combined with lack of sleep, it's a problem. You know, I think
Yeah, I just had the fortune of hearing the great Denise Smith from Skidmore University, and you know, talking about cardiac issues and how, you know, sleep is a huge issue in that as well. So, you know, I don't think we're going to be having this conversation 5 years from now when we're talking about behavioral health. We're just going to be talking about general wellness. That's going to be the conversation, because there really is no dividing line here. There's no silo to sit in when you talk about these things. It's all blended together. And you know, I do, like I said, believe that sleep is the new frontier. And when you talk, and one of the things that she said, just to your point, is that you know, if you want to look at a silver bullet, if there is a silver bullet, it is physical fitness and nutrition when it comes to firefighters, and that's going to help your sleep and other issues that you have. I mean, I don't know if you had this experience, John, and I never understood why, but when you talked about busy companies, I mean, I would wake, you know, you'd be up all night, in and out, trying to get some sleep, and then you'd walk past the kitchen and just start eating donuts. And like, I never understood, you know, like why I was doing that. I would never do that at home if I woke up. Like that wasn't even a thought. But you're trying to regulate something. You know, I'm not smart enough to know what I'm trying to regulate, but there are plenty of people that are, and we're not. You know, you and I probably not going to figure out how to fix this, but I think just start having this conversation is important. There'll be people that'll look at it.
The meals in fire stations are still, it's a cultural thing, right? I mean, nobody wants, the last thing you want to do is come into a firehouse and, if it's your night to cook some type of tofu meal. It will end very, very badly for you, especially if you're a newer guy. So we still have that mentality of, you know, we're going to eat the stuff that we're probably not going to be eating at home. You know, the guys that come into the firehouse and cook are generally cooking, like, it's generally a very heavy meal, probably not super healthy. And it's not something you would serve to your family at home, because it's something you got to mass produce. Depending on the size of the station you're working at, you're feeding 6, 8, 10, 15 people. It's got to be quick and easy, and it's got to taste good. And it's more or less going to be awful for you. Most guys who retire from the fire service, generally in their first year, kind of lose 5 to 10 pounds, you know, because they're not hanging out at a fire station eating crap all day, whether it's comfort food, whatever you want to call it. But, you know.
Well, there's been a slow shift. I've seen this in this as well. So, I mean, I think we're doing a little better. We have to do much better as far as diet and exercise. So I think in the last 10 or 15 years, we're in better shape. at least in the career firefighters. I'm not seeing that as much in volunteers, but maybe I'm just missing that. But it seems like, again, things change slowly, and we are getting better, but we need to get much better.
There is a question, and it's actually a great question.
You're muted, Sarah. Okay, there you go. Now you're not.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
I was just going to say there's a great question in the chat that I wasn't sure if you guys saw, but have you been able to track how successful different resources are in the department? And I'd like to be able to go back to the chief with a concrete answer on whether different measures are working or not, so we can scrap things that aren't working and keep funding. Have you guys done any assessments like that in your departments? Because I have some thoughts on it, but I want to not try to take over the conversation.
In Syracuse, we did. We tracked some things that could potentially be tied to peer support, but a lot of it, like EAP usage. We always had a lot of solid data on that, like how many members. It was always, we never had a name or anything like that attached to it, but we would get a report annually on how many members utilized EAP assistance. What you would see is that if EAP usage went up, like missed days of work would be attributed to something other than a physical injury tended to go down. Now, obviously, when COVID happened and everything, that all went out the window because all of our data was a mess as far as who was off from work and why. But they seem to be inversely proportional, I guess. So the more people were using EAP, the fewer people were out on some type of stress leave. Even though that was kind of, you couldn't always put your finger on exactly why somebody was out of work, but you would have a good idea of. So we tracked that type of data. And I think our EAP program was very successful in terms of, somebody not missing 6 months of work because they were stressed over something, either personal or professional. But that was the extent of the data we tracked. But Frank, I'm sure you have much more to share on that.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I always struggle with this question. And we tracked a lot of things in New York, and we've tracked a lot of things around the country. Is it scientifically significant? It's really hard. It's hard to say. I always get caught up in this. I mean, I know how important it is, and I know how it changes lives, and how it saves lives. But I have never been able to, point at, data and say, okay, can you see this? This is really clear. And I hope that that's coming. Sarah, do you have any thoughts on that? Because it's something that I've struggled with.
Yeah, so we actually think, and what we learned from, so we did a cluster randomized trial of the stress first aid intervention, and Frank worked with us on that one, went in and trained the departments on the NFFF model. And what I think we're seeing with that is actually the mechanism of action for that intervention is increasing just perceptions at the firehouse level, that that people in the department are know how to respond, that they feel more supported. So it's really like that sources of, I think there's a measure called like the sources of occupational support. And I think sometimes just going straight to the firefighters, if you can track that over time, doing like, hey, are you feeling more supported? Do you feel like you have someone you can talk to? Those types of things. I mean, it's not, and then the other thing that you could do is measure, there are some validated measures for like just screeners for depression and anxiety. It kind of depends on if you think the department members would be willing to take it. But I would say if your department is developing a program and has peers, that maybe a discussion about, hey, do we want to measure this across time? Do we want to see, are people finding this effective, and do we see changes in these things across time? Do you see it trending in a direction? And we actually did see, I was kind of surprised because we did see changes with that. Now, I think the other challenge of it is we found that we didn't see changes in things like depression or anxiety, but partly because we saw them trending in the right direction. but it takes so long to implement a program, right? So we thought, like, best case scenario, we go in, implement the program, and I think, Frank, do you remember follow up on that was like 9 months, 12 months, something like that?
Right.
We thought, oh yeah, we'll go back and assess it. Things were trending in the right direction, but turns out it takes much longer than that to implement a program. You can train people up, but you got to keep going after that. And so I think that if that team or that group wants to do some assessments, and we can definitely forward you, what we used in our studies. If you can get people to fill that out and just track it across time, I think just even measuring the support within the department and how supported people feel. I think that's probably the mechanism that makes that.
Yeah, I mean, but people want to know dollars and cents, like if I, there's always like you get 10 times your return. If you put $100,000 in, you're going to save $1 million. And that's what we've been saying. I haven't seen that, in a spreadsheet, a concrete spreadsheet.
Yeah.
But I believe that, but I would love for somebody to be able to pull that together.
We have like some gross assessments of if you can decrease, because there's some measures out there, some reports on like if you can decrease rates of depression, those types of things that might be useful. We actually also have an economist that we've started working with. So let me see that's a great question for next month.
It costs a lot to get a firefighter up to speed and recruitment and finally, hiring and outfitting, and just losing one firefighter to a behavioral health issue, it costs a fortune. And I would say we lose, half the firefighters that we lose during their career are because of behavioral health issues. They're going to be either substance abuse issue, depression, PTSD, or something that they just leave the fire service and we don't know why, and it may be a behavioral health issue. So a lot of people that we lose through attrition and not retirement are leaving because of behavioral health issues, and that costs a fortune.
Yeah, and just in general, quality of life decreasing. I mean, those are you can put numbers. You can put some general numbers on it, but just the human impact, I think.
Yeah, and if you want to convince a chief, you say, hey, listen, you want to stay off the front page of your local newspaper? Because it's going to be a DWI where one of you guys crashes into whatever, or some other fight in a bar or something like that. If you have a program, that's less likely to happen. It can happen, but it's less likely to happen. So not only was it save money, but it saved a lot of embarrassment and and lives, of course.
I see Jennifer has a question here, and I can speak to this a little bit. She's asking essentially why physical fitness standards are so strongly resisted in the fire service. That's a very interesting question. The IAFF actually came out with a peer fitness program several years ago, similar to like peer support. It's a training that was available, basically making people in fire stations personal trainers to a degree. There is a distinct benefit. Firefighters who are physically fit are very, very unlikely to have a career-ending injury that's going to prematurely end their career. So the data is there. Firefighters who are healthy generally work very productive careers. However, I can give one example. Like in Syracuse, the union attempted to implement an annual, when they were in contract negotiations, like an annual physical fitness standard where you take the CPAT, the candidate physical ability test, which everyone in the academy has to take and pass in New York State to become career firefighters. The union said, hey, what if we do this once a year? And every year, everybody in the department has an opportunity. We schedule the dates. They come over to the training division. If they successfully pass the CPAT, which is a fairly minimal physical fitness standard, they get a bonus. They get $1,000 bonus that year, because they knew that there's going to be some people that they're so out of shape, they're not even going to bother to try and take the test. So you're not going to end up paying everybody a bonus. And also, some people it might incentivize them. Everybody loves money, right? There might be some guys who will, actually get out and get in shape and train for the CPAT so they get $1,000? And the answer we got repeatedly was no, because what if they get hurt doing the CPAT? They get physically injured taking this annual test, or we're then on the hook for, their disability claim or something silly like that. And that answer essentially came from the city attorneys to the chief's office, who passed down to the union. And I don't think it's very unique. I think people somehow envision, hey, if we force these guys, or we strongly encourage these guys to work out in the fire station, if they suddenly get hurt, who's responsible for their lifelong injuries now? Is it our problem? Is it theirs? And it's such a silly argument, because if they get hurt on the fire ground or worse, they're 100% your responsibility. That is going to be an injury or illness that the department owns. But if people just get that legal thinking going, where they're like, oh, well, no, if we force them to take this test every year, which we weren't going to be forcing them, it was optional. If they get hurt doing it, it's our responsibility. So no, it's a non-starter. And it was just such an uphill battle that it was eventually just dropped.
Yeah, I mean, I think people are resistant because it's really hard. It's really hard to eat right, and physically train. And most of us are just kind of treading water with our time and our finances. And we put that on the back burner because we take care of ourselves last. And that's what first responders do. We're the last ones to, our kids have perfect teeth with, $10,000 braces, and we haven't gone to the dentist in 3 years. So that's our nature. I agree. We really have to figure out a way, to put that first, because, that's going to save our lives and save our careers. And, we're broken down horses by the time we get to the finish line, and you can't recover from, 30 years of not taking care of yourself doing this kind of work. The shoulders are gone, the knees are gone. And now all of a sudden you think you're going to try to, play catch up, and that's impossible. Well, you can do a little bit, but, you're not going to repair all the damage that you've done over the time. I think it's really hard. I travel the country, and, a lot of firefighters are barely making ends meet. And, they're working second jobs and watching the kids while their spouses work. And it's a rat race. To fit a workout in and to a nutritious meal, not eating fast food, takes a lot of time. So we have to kind of move the focus to the station. Like you said, John, making sure we're at least doing it in the station, make sure that we have time for physical fitness in the station and good nutrition. It's a start, but we have to do more.
I also think when we have, Brittany is right now working with a department that's implementing like just an annual test. I think sometimes people think, oh, as soon as this is implemented, you're going to try and kick people out. But it's like Frank said, you have departments that are paying a lot to get people trained up and to get them outfitted, to get them trained, to get them ready to go, get them integrated. And people are not, I get why people are concerned. Oh, they just want to get rid of firefighters. Almost every department I've worked with, I can count on one hand the number of people I've heard of who actually been relieved of duty. And that's after they've had ample opportunity to fix what's broken and improve their health. And it doesn't happen, but everyone's worried that is what's going to happen, which I get. I mean, I think that's understandable. There's a lot of fear. And I think when departments do want to implement some sort of a firefighter physical ability test, they have to be pretty transparent with the department about what we're doing, how we're doing it. And there's a validated process for the way that goes too. I have a question, if I can ask it. In the wake of what happened for 4th of July up in, well, it was just Highland. Was it Highland Park, just north
Highland
of
Park, yeah.
Chicago? And I actually see I've got Wendy on here too, so I'm going to put her a little bit on the spot because I know she's done a lot of this response. so thinking about, I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind when I hear something like that is the people that are responding, the firefighters and law enforcement that are responding, and how that probably is impacted them. And I think we've seen some pictures out of that event that were pretty heartbreaking. Like, what do you think needs to happen at this point for the people in that department? What would be your like kind of front line of response for them?
For me, and again, it breaks my heart like it breaks yours and everybody here. It's happens again and again and again and again and again, with seemingly no end in sight. I letting first responders know it's okay that they're not okay, because our first gut reaction is, we're there to help. We weren't the victims, but in turn, we are the victims as well. That they're not going to stop doing their job. That when they're responding or reacting or at these calls, they're going to do everything possible to save as many people as possible. But then we have to take a look and take care of ourselves, and allow it. And administrations and municipalities have to understand that the impact that it's going to have on those first responders. They're going to, if I don't know how many people responded to the Highland Park disaster, but let's say 100, 10% of them are going to have, and this is just my observation, are going to have issues that are going to last a lot longer than 2 or 3 months. I mean, everybody's going to be impacted 2 or 3 months, and everybody's changed forever. But they're going to be career-ending mental health issues with that response, and we have to understand it, and we have to support those people right away, and then months and years after, because if for 9/11, going back to 9/11, the peak, what we saw, the peak in people coming in after the collapses, where it was 18 months. So that was our peak, the peak use of our mental health facility 18 months later. And I think this, Sarah, that well, you clearly know it, but the diagnosis of PTSD is usually many years, up to 10 years after the actual trauma. So what ends up happening is people, they compensate. So they deteriorate slowly over many years. So there's going to be firefighters and police officers that responded to Highland Parks that are just going to start drinking a little bit more over the next couple of months. And, their relationships are just going to get just a little bit worse. They're going to have more difficulties with their kids. They're going to have just a little bit worse difficulties at work. And then over time, they become non-functional. And it's hard for them to see the relationship. So we have to make sure that they see the relationship, and we have to have programs that are easily accessible and not embarrassing and non-punitive available to people that respond to these terrible events. And there's going to be one next week, or 2 weeks from now, and we need to learn from what we just saw. I know I got on soapbox here, but it does break my heart that we're not learning, at least on our side, on how to take care of the men and women that are responding to these events.
Thank you. I think that was
Sarah,
and
can't hear you. Okay, got you.
And I completely agree with you. Wendy, would you mind sharing a little bit about what you've got going on there in Texas? And I know that you've responded to a lot recently, and you and Frank have been in communication about that. So I'd love to, if you'd jump in.
You muted, Wendy.
I sure am. I'm sorry about that. I apologize. I was not ready to go on screen today, but anyways, I first of all want to say thank you, Sarah, for organizing this. And Frank has been a huge piece of some of our recovery efforts here in the state of Texas with some major disasters that we've had here. Frank, I believe you were involved when we had the West explosion back in 2013 with helping us develop long-term support for the first responders that are there. But I think really to go back to a system that we are working on here in the state of Texas that really seems to have come together quite well after the Uvalde incident has taken place over the past few years, almost a decade now, with the West explosion being one of the first catastrophic events that really impacted first responders. And then we've had, unfortunately, I don't know what it is here in the state of Texas, if it's because we're so big, I don't really know, but we've had 5 mass shooting events as well, on top of hurricanes and all kinds of other disasters. If it can happen, it will here in the state of Texas. And of course, first responders are greatly impacted. But one of the things that we really started building with the help of the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation and with Frank and his team from New York, and then I always get the Carolinas confused, but I believe it was the South Carolina Firefighters Association with their team that they put together and assisted with after the Charleston group coming in to really support us, is that it goes in phases, really. And what we found is that over the years, when we have done these responses with both short-term and long-term with the support of first responders and their mental health, is that obviously, depending on what the incident is that they're in operational mode. You know, like we are just set to get it fixed, find some calm in the chaos, and that could mean several days, and it could mean several months, and it could mean several years if you're talking about what Frank is with 9/11 or some of these really large wildland fires, hurricanes, things like that. And so it is very hard to provide that mental health care outside of peer support in those first initial days. And so what we have found in the last year to 2 years is just the difficulty with spontaneous volunteers that want to come in with, groups that have been formed and quote organizations of people who may or may not be trained well, coming in and offering their care and just kind of showing up, which adds to the mental health distress and difficulties with first responders. And so what we have done here in the state of Texas and have perfected, not necessarily perfected, but have made it better over the years, is what we do is we pop up basically like what happens with any mass fatality incident, where we'll come in and instead of, it's a family assistance center is what you'll hear first. So there's a reunification center that goes into a family assistance center that goes into a resiliency center. And so what we've created is a first responder assistance center that provides for like kind of that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, with a lot of peer support built in. We have the capabilities if there is a particular agency that wants to do kind of a CISM model with a roundtable group. But I think you're right, Frank, is that a majority of the work that we did specifically in Uvalde, but with a couple of the other shootings, was that peer-to-peer, and it wasn't bringing them into a building. It was going out there and walking side by side with them. And so it worked really well. And then there were a couple of agencies that did want to have some sort of kind of debriefing model, but it was modified. But we provided peer support, we provided the chaplaincy, we provided mental health clinicians that were trained in EMDR to be able to help kind of get those stuck memories there out. And then what we're doing now is with the process of our disaster behavioral health group with HHS, or Health and Human Services here in Texas, is actually transitioning it from the first responder assistance center now to a first responder resiliency center, which that model for us was helped created by Frank and then the foundation, and providing that support services for the long term. And so we're combining efforts with a lot of agencies here in the state of Texas. We've got Texas A&M through TEACS, and they're starting a new peer program. LEMIT, which is our law enforcement group here in the state of Texas. And then, unfortunately, I think EMS really falls by the wayside quite a bit. They just kind of get lumped in somewhere. But I think the fire service tries to take good care of those, but trying to figure out what works for them as well. And so it's a work in progress, unfortunately, but it seemed to work really well. One of the other people that I think we've got to try to capture too is emergency managers. And usually those are our older firefighters and first responders that are now like transitioning either into the end of their career retirement. And we forget about them when they go into that response period too. And so ensuring that they've got peer support and as well. So it's a long-term model, but looking at the resiliency piece is hard, and what that looks like is what Frank was talking about, just the long-term issues that'll come from that.
Wendy, that sounds like incredible work that you're doing there. And I know it's really is an uphill battle, particularly initially, a lot of different groups come in, and it's very hard to keep balance. After the collapse in Miami, the building collapse, within a couple of days, we had people there with like rescue boa constrictors. Like it was crazy.
That's my favorite story.
Right.
Yeah, but it is hard. But staying there for the long haul, like you are, is I think the key. When you mentioned as well, there are a lot of people that are not getting the services that they need. The fire service, we're not doing everything we can, but we're doing as much as we can. It seems like, but in law enforcement, the dispatchers, emergency room nurses, emergency room doctors, other auxiliary people that are impacted as much seem to get left out. I always, to me, it's hard for me to even say it without getting choked up after a mass shooting in Aurora, Colorado. About 3 or 4 days after the shooting, we went to visit the dispatchers, and we walked in the dispatch center, and they just started to cry. Because I think because no one's ever thought about them probably, and the impact that those calls had on them. We didn't have to do anything. We just had to show up and start hugging people. That was helpful. So I love what you're saying, and how we have to think about this response and everybody that's involved, and support them for the long term.
Well, and I have 2 thoughts that I just want to throw out there real quickly. Number one is what made this particular response really interesting as well is because of the dynamics of what happened. And so there were a lot of death threats, not only to law enforcement, but also to firefighters and EMS, and to us that were out there. We could not go out in public to do an errand. We had to take our uniforms off because it was so high. And so we add the addition of what's going on with our culture right now, that there's a lot of distrust with the community and first responders. And, I think firefighters and EMS are getting lumped into that now. And so I think we have to really think about that component as well, because I think in essence, that was really one of the big driving factors for some of the stress that the first responders were going through, not only the shooting itself, but the potential that their life could be taken because of, payback or retribution. Right. The other thing that I want to say too is that you really need to be connected to people that know what they're talking about and can give you a guidance or give you referrals. And so for us, because we staffed our First Responder Assistance Center for a month, we knew that we were going to have a hard time finding people to be able to staff that. We did weeks at a time. And so for me, it was important to go, who can I call to be able to get the right person in there? And the foundation was the first person, because I knew they would get me in touch with Frank. But just knowing who your people are and who you can trust, instead of having all those people show up like what you were talking about as well, with their comfort bunnies and snakes, and who knows what they're. And a lot of people now, especially because of social media, are responding so they can put something on Facebook or they can put something on Instagram that I would hear. So it's like I don't know if I can say this, but it's like they're trauma junkies or trauma. We call them whores. So if you need to blank that word, Sarah. But they want to be there and show their faces and say I was there, and they don't even do anything, or they do more damage. And so always connect with the people. And I think doing this group and having like the lead of Frank and John and some of your experts, go to them if you need referrals or resources.
Those are all excellent points. And I think one thing that the fire service is still kind of struggling with, the vast majority of career fire departments anyway do EMS, and it probably makes up a very large percentage of their total call volume. And if you think of, pick maybe the last 10 or 11 active shooter type events or mass shootings, most of them occurred in communities you probably never heard of before the active shooter event took place. So for any fire department anywhere to tell themselves or their people or the politicians they serve at that's not going to happen here. It absolutely could happen there, and it can happen to any community anywhere in 5 minutes. So I think that's something that everyone's going to have to eventually brace for and figure out how to pick up the pieces after their responders are exposed to that. And I think to Frank's point, dispatchers especially are forgotten 99% of the time. And if you think about it, they are in an almost helpless type situation. I mean, they're on an end of the phone hearing probably some absolutely horrific things, and they can't physically do anything about it other than pass on the information to people who can. So they're in a very unique spot in that they get to hear all of the horrible parts of the call, but they don't get to do anything hands-on to fix it. So they still have that type of personality where they're fixers, right? But they don't actually get to respond to the call and help to maybe mitigate the situation. So they are very frequently in a tough spot. That is a thankless profession, regardless if they're dispatching police or fire. So I think it is important moving forward to always try and bring them into the fold.
Yeah, and I think it's clearly more difficult now because everyone has a phone. So they would get one phone call 20 years ago, and that would be it. And now they get 1,000 because everyone is making that call. People that are right in the middle of the incident and people that are outside the incidents are calling dispatch. And they are getting it from every angle. And they, like you said, John, they don't know the resolution. They don't know if people lived or died. They just have their imagination that I'm sure runs wild in situations like that. I can't imagine the nightmares that go on after something like that. So yes, we have to take care of everyone, and they're part of it.
Awesome. Well, we are at the end of the hour, so I'm gonna just say thank you again to everyone for jumping on and for having a conversation. And this was awesome. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next
thanks,
month.
Sarah, and thanks for everyone. This is I know it's the inaugural, but I hope we hope to watch this happen every month and forever.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Take care.
Guys, talk to you soon.
Bye.